India's ascent to becoming a global superpower is a topic of much discussion and speculation. India has the potential to make significant impact on the world stage because of our massive population, expanding economy, and growing influence in international affairs. Let's take a listen to Dr. Walalu.
When India overtook China in April to become the world's most populous nation, observers wondered, will New Delhi surpass Beijing to become the next global superpower? India's birth rate is almost twice that of China, and India has outpaced China in economic growth for the past 2 years. Its GDP grew 6.1% last quarter, compared with China's 4.5%. At first glance, the statistics seems promising. The question has only become more relevant as Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi met with President Biden in Washington recently. From a US perspective, if India, the world's largest democracy according to the US, really could surpass China, that would become something to shout about. India is China's natural adversary. India's economy has remained much smaller than that of China. In the early 2000s, China's manufacturing, exports, and GDP were about 2 to 3 times larger than India's. Now, China's economy is about 5 times larger, with a GDP of $17.7 trillion versus India's GDP of $3.2 trillion.
However, it must be emphasized that the progress of a nation's economy and its impact over the world is the resultant of a combination of leadership quality, built-in accountability and administration. Composite of of these factors inevitably mobilizes resources for improving the quality of indigenous human resources through mother tongue-based indigenous schooling. Leadership of each and every developed country, be it China, Russia, or collective West, is in sharp contrast to the underdeveloped countries have done just that to achieve a result. Whatever importance India is enjoying in the international field is because of our 1.4 billion people, which makes India the most populous country in the world, even above China. India's large and youthful population is a vast workforce and a huge consumer market. This demographic dividend, an invaluable resource, has fallen on the lap of Indian society without any effort from political leadership. By harnessing this resource can make all the difference in shaping the future of India, which in turn will inevitably shape world politics. Harnessing of this resource to propel India's economic growth and development demands able national leadership. Does India have that kind of leadership in place? Answer is no. Data shows that every second elected lawmaker in Indian Parliament has a tag of criminal record, and every third one is a semi-illiterate. It is true that India's economy has been steadily growing for the past few decades. India has a reasonably well manufacturing base, a burgeoning service sector, and a growing middle class. During the last 2 years, India has emerged as one of the fastest growing major economies globally. And because of its population size, its GDP, which is gross domestic product, is expected to surpass that of many developed countries in the coming years. These achievements are to be ascribed to the quality of India's human resources rather than its political leadership. Based on the World University Ranking, none of the Indian educational institutions come within the first 100 in the world. This is an indication of failure of political leadership rather than quality of Indian students whose intellectual excellence is to a large extent propping up competitive edge of US in the international market. According to a report received in February 2023, India's research and development expenditure as a percentage of GDP is only 0.7%, compared to 2.8% in the United States, 2.1% in China, 4.3% in Israel, and 4.6% in South Korea. Let's listen to Dr. Walalu again.
India has been falling behind in the race to develop science and technology to power economic growth. China graduates nearly twice as many STEM students as India's. STEM, by the way, stands for science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. It is an umbrella term used to group together the distinct but related technical disciplines of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. The term is typically used in the context of education policy or curriculum choices in school. Here in the hard facts, China spends 2% of its GDP on research and development, while India spends 0.7%. 4 of the world's 20 biggest tech companies by revenue are Chinese. None are based in India. China produces over half of the world's 5G infrastructure. India, just 1%. TikTok and similar apps created in China are now global leaders, but India has yet to create a tech product of global nature. India has no entry in this race. China holds 65% of the world's AI patents, compared with India's 3%. China AI firms have received $95 billion in private investments from 2013 through 2022 versus India's $7 billion.
Excellence and success in research are not just about investment alone, but far more important is political leadership guiding research. One of the most serious drawbacks in India's progress in research is the use of English language, which is the language of just 5% of the population. The remaining 95% don't have access to technical education. Disbanding most of the nation from higher studies at home imposes serious limitation on technological advancement. This is a consequence of substandard and incompetent leadership. Despite serious drawbacks in political leadership, recorded economic growth is primarily because of inherent entrepreneurship quality of the Indians and far less due to the government planning and support. Here is Dr. Walalu again quoting the late Prime Minister of Singapore, who said, referring to the potential of India, that India is not likely to achieve economic success for various reasons.
The founding father and a long-time leader of Singapore, Lee Kuan Yew, had great respect for Indians. Lee worked with successive Indian prime ministers, including Nehru and Indira Gandhi, hoping to help them make India strong. But as Lee explained in a series of interviews published back in 2014, the year before his death. He reluctantly concluded that this was not likely to happen. In his analysis, the combination of India's deep-rooted caste system that was an enemy of meritocracy, its massive bureaucracy, and its elites' unwillingness to address the competing claims of its multiple ethnic and religious groups led him to conclude that it will never be more than, and I put this in quote, the country of the future, end of quote.
India's participation in international forums like the G20, BRICS, and the United Nations showcases may indicate its growing role in global governance. India's recent rising diplomatic engagements, like partnership with various countries, including strategic alliances, trade agreements, and defense collaborations, and its ostensible increasing global influence is boosted due to publicity from USA and collective West in their attempt to drift India into the Western camp to counter China. Quality of India's human resource, like that of China, 10,000 years of glorious history like China, natural resources, rich tradition, and culture like China is lying waste. India's true potential is being concealed by virtue of an imposed administration and education system inherited from collective West. Unless the Indian nation is stripped of these slavish imitation and bastardized culture of collective West under the influence of a leadership which is truly Indian, her true potential will never come to fruition. Ostensible importance of India in the current international politics is not from India's position of strength, but being engineered by collective West to draw India fully into the Western camp, so that India's vast human and natural resources can be utilized by the West to counter China. Whole world is witnessing in Ukraine how weak collective West is. They are too dishonest and too decadent to counter China alone. Progressive people of India better note that collective West conflict with combined strength of Russia and China, where India is tricked to side with collective West, will lead to unprecedented misery of common Indians. Their leaders will simply migrate to whatever remains of the collective West. If you like what you see and hear, please subscribe and ring the bell.